I saw The Joker this weekend, and upon leaving the theater, was immediately struck with silence as I tried to process what it was I just saw and tried to process what it was doing to me, what it was making me feel. It's a great film. It's well shot. Cinematography is amazing, and the acting's out of this world. But it's a dark movie. And I think it's so dark because of how real it is. And I mean it's real because the path that Arthur Fleck, aka the Joker, takes, the downward spiral that is his path, is a path and a fall that we all as humans have the potential to go down. The movie does a great job of showing you a world that is hurting, a world that is chaotic, a world that's dirty, and a world that turns its back on those that are less fortunate, those that are desperate, and consequently Arthur Fleck, our main character, is the victim of such a world. You could very easily sum up what Arthur and the rest of the characters in this world are going through by suffering. That's exactly what it is. It's suffering and it's pain in various ways. Again, getting back to the reality, the realness of this movie is that so much more different than all of us. We're all going through something or have been through something. Even the most seemingly fortunate around you is dealing with stuff. In fact, the one thing that is promised in this world, I don't think there's much promised to us as humans. It's, at least I think the humble stance that most of us just strive to take, is that nothing is promised to you in this world except for suffering. It's inescapable. And I don't mean that to bring people down. I actually think that's a positive message. It's in our suffering that our greatest potential selves are revealed to us. I'm going to try to go on without spoiling too much of the movie, but be warned, there could be spoilers ahead. Arthur Fleck is so real because he's so limited, and that's a reflection of us as humans. We're limited. We are vulnerable. I see the words limit and vulnerability as mirror images of themselves, and it's because of our limit and our finiteness, finite meaning we have an end, that we feel so vulnerable, and it's because of this finiteness, this finitude, that we fear vulnerability. We fear being vulnerable, not only with ourselves, but with our peers, with the world around us, and with God, a higher entity. We fear being vulnerable. We fear being vulnerable in relationships of all kinds. On top of that, we fear being vulnerable because we're so unfortunately aware of how much suffering, how much pain is in this world, how much danger there is. You sense this from the earliest stages of the innocence of childhood. You're so vulnerable to the world around you. It's why we need parents. It's why we need family members. And even sometimes that vulnerability is preyed upon by those closest to us. And so we're in a constant state of fear of being vulnerable, both emotionally and physically, and in a constant state of awareness and consciousness to the pain and malevolence, i.e. evil, of the world around us. But the antidote to all this, the solution to all this suffering that we find in our limitation, the answer to all the suffering that we find in how finite we are, is not happiness, it's not joy, it's actually meaning. It's finding meaning that can help you transcend the suffering. And transcendence doesn't mean eradication, it doesn't mean destruction, from what I've found. Transcendence is something entirely different than the destruction of what you're trying to transcend. It's a moving past, right? So I'm going to say that again. I think meaning is the true answer, the true solution to us transcending the suffering that we experience and that is promised to us as humans. Now, getting back to the Joker, we spend a majority of the first act, well, the whole first act, most of the second act, so almost over half the movie, suffering along with Arthur Fleck. You sympathize with him as he's bullied, as circumstance after circumstance puts him in some of the worst situations, on top of being mentally ill, on top of not being healthy. So he's the lowest of the lows, facing this malevolence of the world around him, and he's a victim to it, and we sympathize with that. And he's trying to seek meaning. He's trying to find out who he is. There's a line later, as we're coming to the rising action, we're coming to the climax, where he tells his psychiatrist or his there's a clinician that he's been being interviewed by throughout the film, and he tells her, for the first time ever, I'm starting to realize that I am real. And then he tells her that he's battled for all his life on whether he was real or not. And what I think is the undertones of that statement is that he's battled his whole life with finding meaning. And so you see that reflected in his journey, especially in the second act of the film, where he's trying to find out who his father was. There's the mystery there, and there's this back and forth. We don't know what's going on. He's trying to find an identity, and an identity is a formulation of meaning. It gives you a direction. But here's where I think things start to turn, and I think they can turn for all of us, and the thing I guess that I wanted to take as a warning sign, or the moral of the story that I took. And that's, if you're not too careful, all the suffering and the pain of the world, both objective, meaning external, out in the world, all the pain and the suffering that is subjective, meaning solely affecting you, will make you resentful. It'll make you bitter, and it'll make you a victim. And if you're not too careful, that path will lead you to finding meaning in malevolence. It will lead you to finding meaning in evil. It will lead you to finding meaning in revenge. You can read the journals of mass shooters or mass killers. A lot of them thought their actions, like the Columbine shooters, they thought their actions were an attempt of revenge on life itself, an attempt of revenge on God for creating humans, for just creating being, capital B, itself. And that's ultimately what ends up happening to Arthur Fleck as he becomes the Joker. All this suffering leads him to resent. The switch is, and this is where it gets ironic, is that it's actually in limiting yourself that you cut off your potential to transcend your suffering. So at the end, right before Arthur goes on this killing spree and becomes the Joker fully, it's in a moment where he, after this letdown of the confrontation with what he assumed was his father, after this letdown, he accepts that, you know what, this is just the hand I was dealt. This is the limit to my potential. And it's that acceptance, that limiting of his potential, that sends him down this downward spiral of malevolence and evil. I guess that's the big warning I want to take away and give to y'all from this movie, that I learned that there's so much more to you and you have so much potential. And most often that potential will not be revealed unless you voluntarily face the malevolence of your world in whatever form that takes. If you don't believe me, there's a great quote, and I say it all the time in my videos: the dividing line between good and evil runs down every man's heart, every human heart. That dividing line runs down every single one of our hearts. And if you really thought about it, and you might know people like this, heck, you might have even done this yourself, but if you really thought about it and played this out in your mind, tomorrow, if I decided to, I could wake up and spend every next waking day of my life to create a living hell on earth and make my life a living hell. I would cut off the relationships I would have. I would just make every possible decision I could for the worst possible outcome. And inevitably, after days of this attempt, I could create a living hell out of my life. And I think that's the darker sides of our potential, getting back to the dividing line down our hearts. And I think that's true. I think there's nothing more true than that. I've seen it happen. I think quite possibly, and I know certain things happen that we can't control, but quite possibly every homeless person on the side of the street has probably been down that path, or at least is experiencing hell on earth. If that's true, then that means the opposite has to be true as well, that we have the greatest potential to create a heaven out of our earth, to create a heaven out of our life on this earth. And I don't know what that looks like. I think that's an uphill climb. It's a very steep upward climb up a mountain, and it's way less definable, way less rigid, and it's a lot more vague as far as that path. There's probably hundreds of paths that lead to that happening. It's a day-by-day process as well, and probably takes a lot longer. I think the downward spiral to hell on earth is a lot quicker. I think it's exponential as it grows. The upward climb towards creating order and a heaven out of your life is probably going to take a lot longer and much more investment. If you accept that, though, as I do, then it genuinely shows that we have the greatest potential to surpass and transcend the suffering around us. But you cannot and you will not do that if you limit that potential. Getting back to the gist of it, where the Joker goes wrong as far as a character, it's meaning, not happiness and not joy, that I think is the solution to the malevolence and the suffering and the pain in our world and around us today. And maybe you accept this and you chase meaning, and it leads to even more pain and suffering, because that is a potential outcome of this. You have to go on. And stopping, like Arthur Fleck did, the Joker did in the movie, after he found out that he was adopted in the dark path that his childhood had that he had forgotten, he took that as his hand that was dealt, and he limited himself. And it was then that his path was narrowed to one of a downward spiral towards evil. You have to move on. You have to keep working to transcend. You have to keep working to try and find the next meaning, the next greatest potential, the next greatest revealing of potential in your life. And you can do it.